Good morning, Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page Aleph Shinun Hey, 1355. So yesterday, I barely, besides the technical issues, and just for the record, I think the YouTube is perfectly fine. I think it's only the Zoom issue, because the YouTube, that's what I believe. But regardless, so besides the technical issues, I was also having analytical issues in understanding the piece. But let me clarify, before we read inside, page 1355, I'm going to just give an overview that I did yesterday, but yesterday was somewhat scattered and a little combobulated. I'll give it more orderly in orderly fashion. So what I'm going to be explaining now, and please let me know if anything starts breaking up, so I'll know what to do. When I began explaining, what I'm going to explain now is based on Eitz Chaim, Shar Miyut HaYureach. Eitz Chaim is, of course, Arizal, written by Reb Chaim Vital, his student. And this is Shar Miyut HaYureach, where he lays out, in general, Eitz Chaim is like the magnum opus of Arizal's Kabbalah, Tzimtzum, Kav, all the worlds, Ishtalshlus is all in Eitz Chaim, even though there are other books as well, but Eitz Chaim is like a real fundamental. In Tanya, he quotes it all the time. Chassidus is quoted. So there's a Shar Miyut HaYureach, it's called the Gate of the Diminishment of the Moon, Miyut HaYureach, where he explains in detail, Yureach, of course, is Malchus, the level of Malchus. Shemesh, sun, is the level of Zah. As we learned here, the Zah is Bechinas Mashpia, Be'etzem Mahusei, and Malchus is Bechinas Mekabel, Be'etzem Mahusa. So he explains that there are actually 7 stages in Aliyah's HaMalchus, because in the language of Kabbalah, the elevation of Malchus really represents the elevation of all of existence. Because Malchus in the divine spheres is the lowest of the 10 spheres. Malchuscha Malchus Kol Elamim. God as Melech manifests within existence and relates to existence. And that Malchus is the lowest of the 10 spheres, becomes the Keser and the lead that draws the energy of Atzilus into Biyah, the Malchus of Bria into Yetzirah, the Malchus of Yetzirah into Asiyah. So essentially, Malchus in the spherotic language is the lowest of levels. So many ways it represents, I think even in Ayin Beis he says once he says that though we're talking about Malchus, it really means all of existence. So Malchus represents earth. So on one hand, it doesn't have Giluyim of its own, like the moon. On the other hand, the earth, for example, doesn't have the Giluyim, the revelations of heaven. Shamayim, sky. But the earth has the power to give birth. Like we learned a little earlier, the nukva, the feminine energy, is on one hand, is the womb. She needs the seed of the male, the mashpia, to be able to give birth, but the birth comes from the mother, not from the father. So I'm not going to go through an analysis of how Malchus relates, just briefly. So therefore, Aliyah's HaMalchus refers to the Avodah that elevates Malchus from a state of diminishment to a state of full glory, which of course suggests the other way around as well, not just suggests. Malchus also went through Yeridus. Besides the Yerida that it goes down simply in the Shtalshlus, because you go from Chachma to Bina to Das, Netzach Ched Yesod, I'm sorry, Gevurah Chesed, Gevurah Teferes, Netzach Ched Yesod, Malchus. And even before the Tzimtzum, if you remember, Malchus of Ein Sof, the lowest level, so to speak, before the Tzimtzum, where God is envisioning existence, is called Malchus again, in macrocosm. That Malchus will become the beginning of the Kav, beginning of Ak, and the same process repeats itself throughout Ishtalshlus. So this Malchus also goes through many diminishments to get to Malchus. Because since Malchus is, as we learned Chassidus, we learned a number of places earlier, Chassidus elaborates, that on one hand, Malchus is the
You just got choppy for me.
You got
can't hear you.
4 seconds.
I can't even see Rabbi Jacobson. I hear nothing and I see nothing.
How about on YouTube?
Yeah, maybe we should all watch it on YouTube, and this way we won't be able to speak, but maybe we should do that.
There's nothing on YouTube either. I've got it streaming.
Oh, well, now he just shut off. But when he blacked out here, was it put on YouTube still? Because he suggested that on YouTube it doesn't have these apps. It's Zoom.
I think that's the case with the audio, but not with YouTube.
What does that mean, Casey? We don't need the audio, but what is it? I understand now.
He says, I'm aware that my internet went down. It's trying to log back in. He just put that on the text thread. What I mean is that he's got, what I meant is that he does two recordings. One is through YouTube, which is the Zoom session, and he has a separate recording that's audio. I don't know how he does it, but they're two separate pathways of recording. And the audio somehow never gets interrupted because it's just a different mechanism. But the YouTube,
he has to post that later, and hoping it's done.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
He's asking what's the last thing we heard him say.
He's asking that where?
Malchus, you're saying Malchus, I think that's general discussion. And Malchus is doing the Malchus. Malchus already went down, and Malchus before the Tintin, the Malchus up there. And we probably all,
Can people hear me?
perfectly.
Okay. We're just all waiting, I guess. Yuval, you're visiting by your children, Nechdim?
Lots of them over here.
Yeah, כן, שמעתי איזה שום תינוק שבוכה.
Amongst others, yeah. I have here from half a year old to 18.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a special brachos.
Special treat. Yeah. Yeah. Baruch Hashem.
You're a rich man.
You can say that again.
Go back. See, I'm somewhat of a prophet. I told you.
Welcome back.
Okay, so I was giving an overview of Malchus, representing essentially the whole process of Ishtalshel going from the top down, with Malchus being the lowest level, and the process of Aveda where we elevate Malchus. And this explains essentially almost every topic in Judaism, actually. Start with Rosh Hashanah. Binyan HaMalchus, it's called, the building of Malchus. Tamlichuni Aleichem. We blow shofar. We announce and coronate and proclaim God as king, which means God is our authority, Malchus. The idea of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is a Yerida in Malchus. And the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash is the Aliyah of Malchus. That's why the 9th of Av is 9, not 10. It's like a weakness of Malchus, the 10th sphere, dignity, the connection between heaven and earth, Shechina v'shachanti b'seicham, that God's presence rests and dwells among us. And the 15th of Av is like the repair of the moon, the full moon after 9th of Av, because it's Aliyah Malchus. So with that said, and there's so many other things that can be explained when you talk about Melech, even the expressions we say every day. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech ha'olam. Every blessing. Moed ani lefarnecha Melech chai v'kayim. You can't imagine how many references Melech we don't even notice. They're all over. But now, with that said, so the Eitz Chaim explains that there are actually 7 stages of the Aliyah of Malchus. But before I get to that, one more thing. In the Yerida of Malchus, there's 2 aspects. There's what Seder Ishtalshus, the natural diminishment of energy, just like before the Tzimtzum, it gets diminished until it's Malchus of Ein Sof to create. And then in the spheres, it goes first from Chachma to Bina to Da, all the way through Malchus. That's the natural order that God implanted in existence. That there should be, like the teacher has to diminish or conceal the energy so the student can receive. But then there's a Yerida Malchus that comes through our chatoim, to our sins. As achet, avera really means displacement, a disalignment. It's when we do something like chet eitzadas. So that caused, what do we say? That the ikar shchina betachtenim, the shchina Malchus was down. Shchina is always Malchus, is down here below, resting and manifesting in existence. The chet eitzadas caused Malchus, calls the shchina to go up one level to the Rakia Hashvi, to the 7th heaven, which really means a level of concealment. The next generation caused it to go even more concealed, until Avram Avinu began the process after 7 aliyahs of Malchus being concealed through sins now, through human transgressions. Then comes Avram, who began to bring it back down all the way to the 7th generation of Moshe Rabbeinu, so there's an addition to Malchus's natural diminishment, there's also the potential for sin and the actuality. So in many ways you can say that when God created the world, he created the world, a perfect world, but he concealed the divine presence, or else Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, could never have sinned. Because if they could never have sinned if it was not concealed. Because if they were living in Atzilus, and it was completely divine revelation, even though Ikar Shechina b'tachtenim Moshe, but there was also a Yetzer Hara. There was a serpent. There was a concealment. That's why they were able to defy God's command not to eat from the tree of knowledge. I'm not going to go into the details of that, just to point that out. So how does Chassidus explain that? So there's a mimer, I've mentioned a number of times this mimer. It's called Al Ken Yemer HaMoishlim Tofrei Sadik Aleph from the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe brings in Bas Lagani Tovshin Lamed Aleph. It's a very fundamental mimer where he talks about that the Chet Eitzadas was possible because prior to that was the diminishment of the moon. And that was possible because prior to that was the shattering of the container, Shviras HaKelim. And that was possible because prior to that was the Tzimtzum Arishin, the divine, the utter concealment of the divine energy, which we call the Tzimtzum Arishin. So in essence, if you think about it psychologically, problems don't begin when there's a problem. There's always a root. The first issue began when God concealed himself. As soon as God concealed himself, even though the concealment is clearly a divine concealment, it's God's power to conceal, but it's still a concealment. From the perspective of the recipient, the student, the concealment can be misunderstood and misconstrued to the point where you think God has disappeared. The child stops looking for the father that concealed himself, where the whole point of the concealment was to bring out, elicit the ingenuity of the child, the famous example. So the concealment of the Tzimtzum Arishin allowed for the shviras, for the imbalance of Tohu. So the Eris and Kalim, their tension created a shattering, a breaking. That in turn, and this is where I'm leading to, is to the 4th day of creation when the sun and moon were created, Zoh and Malchus, Mashpia Makabel. So even though initially they were both Me'eres Agdelim, great luminaries, but there was the potential that the moon actualized that by claiming and arguing and complaining, there can be 2 kings with 1 crown, even though God made it that way. And I'll soon explain what that means. And that's when the moon was diminished. And the moon's diminishment created even more concealment. And that concealment ultimately led to Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, being able to eat from the tree of knowledge. So there you see how Malchus plays such a role. The diminishment of the moon is Malchus, which originates from the Helen Vahed, the Tzimtzum, which is also in Malchus of Ein Sof, the Tzimtzum that conceals it. And then afterwards comes the Rishima, the Kav, and the whole Seder Ishtalshus. Now, you can't call the diminishment of the moon an actual human sin because it was the moon. Even though, in a way, God said, yes, he punished the moon by saying, okay, diminish yourself. And then God says, Avia laika para, bring an atonement for me for diminishing the moon, which is a long discussion of its own. I will refer to it a bit now in this overview. But bottom line is, so now we have a situation where concealment allows for problems. It doesn't mean there has to be problems, but problems do evolve. And now comes the Avodah of repairing Malchus, repairing both the diminishments caused by our sins, by our transgressions, by us wandering away from the divine purpose of our lives, and also repairing and correcting the diminishments that allow Malchus in the first place to be concealed, which is essentially repairing and transforming the Tzimtzum, which is so much the theme of Ayin Beis, transforming the Tzimtzum, especially in the last, I would say, this volume and half of the previous volume of Ayin Beis. So with that said, now let's go back to the Eitz Chaim. I'll explain the Eitz Chaim, and I'll explain it then. We'll come back to the Maimer, and you'll see how it all comes together. But this introduction is critical, or else it gets very confusing when we read what's going on here. So the Eitz Chaim, in a very organized way, says there are actually 7 Aliyahs in Malchus, which of course implies that there's 7 Yeridus as well. But he talks the Aliyahs. I'm not going to go through all 7. I'm only going to go through 6 and 7, because that's what he quotes in Ayin Beis, and most relevant to our discussion here. And then, I don't want to call it an 8th level, but there is another level that's even higher than the 7th, which earlier in Ayin Beis, and I'm going to refer to it as well, he says he doesn't even count that in Eitz Chaim, because completely new Chadosh that's not connected. His Chachus Gemura with Klolos Ishtashlos, completely new energy, which we've learned about. That's the energy of Ein Oid. I'll get to that momentarily. Okay, so now that we've established that, let me explain. I'll just summarize the first levels are all Malchus beginning to be rebuilt. Think of a building that was broken, a temple that was the Beis Hamikdash that was destroyed, or psychologically a person being completely demoralized. Eicha Yashva Badat on Tisha B'Av. Whoa, alas, how she sits alone, the loneliness of Malchus, Yerushalayim, after the destruction. You can't suddenly come and say, okay, hey, let's start dancing and rebuilding. It's a slow process. The moon is reflective of that process. Why? Because the moon is always going through miyut, v'ribut.
We lost you again, Rabbi.
About 3 seconds, yeah, a few seconds, yeah.
But now we can't hear you at all.
That's why the Jewish people. Okay, looks like we're going down.
Now we can hear. Now we can hear.
No, we lost you about for 6-7 seconds, but it was an important point you were making.
Every point is important, obviously. So therefore the moon reflects Malchus. So the moon is always going through changes because Malchus, as I said, goes through changes both ways. In its diminishment as the moon wanes, and as the moon grows and waxes. That's why Yisrael, Damon, the Levana, we're compared to the moon, and we count to the moon. We bless the moon every month because the closest approximation of the Jewish people also go through these stages, constant change, as opposed to the sun, which is just a consistent mashpia, like we learned, the mashpia of energy. So now we're talking about the moon. The moon is representative of Malchus. So the Eitz Chaim explains that Malchus doesn't just grow overnight. It's a slow process. First, Malchus starts receiving a little energy. Like I said, after a destruction, after demoralization, after betrayal, it takes time. It took Moshe Rabbeinu 80 days to gain forgiveness though it took him to receive 40 days to receive the Torah. So it's a slow building process. In the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, it takes 10 days to build Malchus from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. So the 7 stages of Aliyah HaMalchus are essentially the rebuilding of the dignity and of the connection between the existence and the divine. So as I said, I'm not going to go through the first 5 because it's very Kabbalistic, but suffice it to say, each level slowly is starting to receive more energy from Zah. Remember, Zah is the mashpia. The Shemesh is always shining, but the moon is not always receiving it to the fullest extent. So to break it down, he says the first 3 levels, I actually wrote it out a long time ago when we first learned about it. So I have it written out. So he says the first 3 levels is really more what's called acher ba'acher. Malchus is still receiving from the back side of Zah. In Kabbalah Chassidus, it talks about ponim and acher. You can receive energy face to face, but you can receive it back to back, which means it's much more diminished. When 2 people love each other, they look at each other face to face. Like he says in Tanya, when something you want to give somebody a gift, you look at them face to face. However, if you have to give energy to someone you don't want to give to, you throw it over your back. It's like almost dismissive. So, but here we're not talking about that. We're talking more that Malchus receives first from the back, like when Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you'll see my back, but not my face. So back represents more of a divine revelation that relates more in a more diminished way. Face always represents something ponim b'ponim, face to face, a fuller gili. So the first 3 aliyahs of Malchus are acher, like he calls it, they're all b'bchinas acher. Because the mashpia, in this case Zah, and the mashpia to Zah, which is bina, chachma bina, is still, Malchus is only receiving the backside of it. The next 4 levels, Malchus begins to receive the face to face, but first it receives it in a very diminished way. Even when you look at your child and you give your child something, it could be face to face, but you're still giving them very much like spoon feed.
You're broken up.
We lost
You're broken up.
you. You froze again.
At least 5 or 6 seconds so far.
The last thing we heard you say is that the next 3 levels when Malchus begins to receive more directly.
Let me ask somebody who knows. Does anybody know when you go when Malchus is going up, receiving it, even though it's in the back, it's going up the Seder Stalshus, like the energy from the Yisod, and is that the way it goes? Is it there like levels that it goes up? Seder Stalshus in the backwards way. I mean, reversing it. I mean, it's back to back, but is it go Yisod and Hod and Netzach in that order? Anybody know that?
It's a good question. If nobody knows it, you can ask Rabbi Jacobson. But it seems to me it's not necessarily that simple. It's a matter of whether it's going through Zah or passing over Zah, like Derech Maiver. That's more directly, is what I understood him to be saying. So I don't know that it's like exact reversing the order dafka, like you say, step by like level to level.
It's not what I said. I just have no idea what he's talking about.
Well, I know, but I'm speculating. Let's put it that way. From what he said so far, it doesn't sound that way. It's more a matter of, is the Gilui of Elikus direct or is it indirect? And direct seems like Derech Ma'avir, and indirect is like Derech Hislapshus, which would be through the Seder Yishtalshalus. But we'll see. I'm not trying to be an Ibra Chacham here. I'm just trying to speculate an answer to a really good question.
Shlomo, are you back in America?
Yes, I'm back. But then Shabbos, I had something that I had to be out of New York. And in 2 hours, I have in Champaign, Illinois, I'm flying for a auction of my grandson. Yeah,
Mazel
it'll be
tov.
same good one. Coming back on Sunday night. But
Like to see you one day, Shlomo.
Okay. But in Eretz Yisrael, I got you. I heard you. That was good. So thank you for the technology today.
Yeah, we missed you when you weren't able to participate in the class. Everybody missed you. We kept asking about you.
Thank you very much. In Israel, it was a little complicated because the class started in the afternoon in Israel, so not always was easy. But sometimes
better than Isaac has to do it when it's still dark out.
Yeah, so 6:30 a.m. it's a wonderful time. Wonderful time to have to be thinking your best.
Just the best achana for davening.
Yeah, we just finished. I just about finished building an apartment by my son in California. So I'm gonna spend the winter there. The problem is he davens at around the same time that he davens at 7 a.m., which is in the middle of the shir, or sometimes the beginning of the shir. Drives me nuts trying to daven and listen to the shir at the same time. I mean.
I want you to know that the YouTube was a good thing. Sometimes if you missed it for an hour, you got it right away before the share was put on the regular WhatsApp.
Yeah, we know that, and that's what I'm going to be. I have to daven, so you're not going to hear my dumb questions. They'll probably be davening. That's my only choice, unless I go to another town. But he davens at 7 a.m. except for Sundays. Sunday it's 8:30.
Tzvi, I'm going to make you feel a little better, Tzvi. Chassidus is part of davening. So you're not doing two things at the same time. When Chassidus starts, you meditate, right? But it's part of davening. It's not a contradiction. It's like somebody starts Hodu with the Chazan, comes to Shemoneh Esrei, the Chazan Shemoneh Esrei, and he's still in the middle of Vayborach David. He's still davening with the minyan. So you're davening with the Chassidus, the minyan could say Shemoneh Esrei, so you're behind a little bit, but you're still with the minyan. So you're doing both at the same time, just to make you feel a little better, I hope.
I don't know, it makes me feel a little better. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. That was well said.
I think Hillel said he was asked how come the Chassidim are starting to daven late. So he said, "What do you care that they're davening before davening Chassidus only?"
That's good. That's good. I like that too. Yeah, maybe it's all hashgacha process. You can build my Malchus up. Thanks.
The bottom line is, whoever's in California on the West Coast, they start davening real early. 6:30 is when they start davening. And they daven sometimes for an hour and a half, sometimes for 2 hours, but that's when they start. So you guys are way ahead of the East Coast.
Yeah, I don't know why, but everybody davens early here. It's correct. 6:30 or 6:45. It's a challenge.
No, I meant 6.
That's good because usually the West Coast, all disgusting things come usually from the West Coast. So now we have some good things coming from the West Coast first.
No, I meant 6:30. You start davening not in the synagogue or in shul. You start davening when you get on Zoom. That's when your davening starts.
I see. And I'm saying that there aren't that many shuls here on the West Coast. and most of the Shachris minyanim start at 6:30 or 6:45 a.m. I know in Crown Heights you could probably pick a minyan every 15 minutes at a different time in the morning, but here you get one shot, maybe two.
In Crown Heights, there's a lot of lady gayers.
Yeah, just the shul across the street from my house has 4 minyanim every morning. I mean, except for Shabbos. It's machayim. I love it.
You guys are spoiled. You guys are spoiled.
Yeah, man, I love it here, but I also hate the cold, so I can't stand it. So,
Rabbi Jacobson just said that his modem keeps resetting. Either it's defective or the internet provider is running tests, just letting you know. Not that this helps us.
mhm. Right. Yeah, we send people to the moon, we can't even get this going.
What's that, Svi?
We send people to the moon, Hulu, and we can't even get this stuff going.
Yeah. Well, we were spoiled too. I mean, if you think about how incredible the technology is, then it doesn't work, and we feel like we're entitled to it.
The first few years, we used to go to Simon's house, and I came almost every day, except when I couldn't find a parking spot. It's a pain in the neck to find parking spots in Crown Heights. And so first I hated the Zoom, but now I'm getting lazy. I love the Zoom when it works.
How many people from the original class, like let's say when you were going into Rabbi Jacobson's house, how many people are still involved on a regular basis?
I know Naftali and Shlomo and I don't know, and myself and there's other people that Eliezer came a little later, I think, if I remember correctly. Eliezer is still in Israel, I guess. And it was something I always hoped. The days we got a minyan, and I got very excited because the Rebbe said to learn all this stuff in a minyan is much more powerful. You know, said it.
There was some minyan.
And now we easily have a minyan.
What we are really here with Chassidus that even though that science is today so updated, it looks that there are things that they still didn't get. We're learning about the moon and the Koyach HaHalem and Moer and all of these things. And I think that in science, the moon is like a reflection. Here we're learning that not at all.
I don't understand the intrinsic or as an or atzmi of the moon, the luminary, as we say. It's still hard for me to hold on to, but it needs to be stimulated, and it won't go by itself. It's still a luminary, and even what we say about the rocks that are glowing. I mean, it's not so easy, this stuff.
No, it's not so easy, and the power of vision, human vision, is also not 100% clear to me, at least. The way that the Rebbe Rashab explained.
Yeah, I think, we were touching on that. Yeah, yes, and it seems that it has qualities of receiving and also vision. There's two ways to look at vision, as we learned: one to receive and one that goes out. So it seems like both things to me. I don't know if he comes to a conclusion. But I always learned that in Judaism we looked at vision as something that goes out to the person. I never quite understood it. I don't know if I'll ever understand it, but that's what I learned.
Sounds like a projection.
Exactly.
I'm not sure how solar power is working, but the idea is that basically when you have the sun shining on it, it takes in a lot of energy. And then even at night, when the sun is not shining there, you still could use it for light and whatever it is. So the energy was received from the sun and it keeps it in storage. It doesn't have the on it, but has a major
that's
storage.
Laguna. Yeah, like in the Levana, the moon stores the energy somehow.
Yeah, but he also said by the Levana that the moon is having its own energy. The sun is turning it on.
Yep. It throws a switch. The sun throws a sun-based switch, a relay, and turns it on. But it has some. It's still hard to understand that it's a luminary itself. And that I knew is completely Kiddush to me. And I've been learning this stuff for years and years and years. I've never heard this before.
Rabbi is back. You got yourself muted, Rabbi.
You're muted. We can see you, but we can't hear you.
I feel like my internet connection is like the moon. It's waxes and wanes.
Sure.
Okay, I'm sorry about this. So let me just, we don't have that much time. Let me just tie it all together. So last thing I was saying was that the Levana represents this Malchus, and it goes through the 7 Aliyahs that the Eitz Chaim. I summed up that the first 3 are really receiving from the backside. Now keep in mind, Zah is the Mashpia, the sun, that transmits and activates the moon. And the Zah itself is drawing from the source of Zah, which is, we'll soon learn, is Keser of Zah, and Keser, literally Teferes of Bina. That is being drawn into Zah, into the mother, into Zah, and Zah activates and illuminates Malchus. So that's the first 3 levels. Then Malchus begins to receive from the face Panim, but it's still coming through Zah. So then I was going to explain the last 2 steps is 6. The 6th Aliyah, he calls that the Aliyah of Kaima Sida B'Shlemusa, the full moon. The full moon is now receiving in its fullest possible way before Mashiach comes, the sun. That's the full moon. It can't be stronger than that because the moon is reflecting the full sun to the earth. That's why it's called the full moon. That's what he calls the 6th level. That level existed every 15th of the month, but in the time of Shlomo Melech, that whole period during Shlomo's time was called Kaima Sida B'Shlemusa. So what's the status then of Zah and Malchus? So he uses these words. I'm actually quoting. He says like this. Now the moon is as great as the sun, not as great in intensity, but the full moon is shining. During the rest of the month, Malchus is only shining partially to the earth, obviously. The moon is always full out in outer space as it faces the sun. We're talking about L'hoyer al Haaretz as it radiates to the earth. So now, Malchus is shining fully. So he says, Panim b'Panim, it's face to face with the sun. Okay, which means with Zah. Second. However, but it's still receiving it from Zah. The moon is not shining on its own. It's receiving it from Shemesh, from the sun. And the kesed of Zah is greater than the kesed of Malchus. That's why the sun is more powerful than the moon. And so we see that Malchus, even in the 6th level, is still lower than the sun. It's still Mashpia and Makabel. Excuse me? Went down again.
You're good.
No,
You're good.
you're fine. You're fine.
Okay. So this is a state. Let me just see if there's anything else irrelevant here. I'm just looking at the language. Okay. Then comes state number 7. Stage number 7 the Eitz Chaim says, Loi hoya ma'elam. That's his expression. I'm reading now both from page 1208 at the bottom, or in middle even. He says, there's the seventh level. So if you look in page 1208, he says, B'mei shlema yikayim asur b'shalom, lo yayin shlema sagil. There's Amar b'chinas ponim b'ponim. Ach kisra l'mayla mikisra. Ava madrega hazayin in Eitz Chaim, he says, Lo hoya oid la'elam. The level of a full moon we have now even. Now comes a level that never existed before. And he says that level is a level where the moon will be like the sun, and they will both receive straight from Tiferes Ima, from one Keser. It's not that it will be traveling through Zah into Malchus. Malchus will have a direct link, not through the sun, not through Zah, to Tiferes Ima. Like Zah. And that's a new revelation that will only be lost in love in the future.
That's
Then
seven, that's seven, right? Not eight, right? Seven, right?
There is no 8. As I said, he doesn't count 8. I called it 8 simply because it's after the 7. Then, yes, that's 7. That's the 7th level. Then comes a level at the bottom of page 1209, he says, this is still, the moon is still receiving, Malchus is still receiving from Oir. It's just now receiving straight from Bina, which is also Oir, from a Keser, as the sun. In other words, Bina is now shining through two tracks, one to the sun and one to the moon, but it's still receiving Oir. Then he says at the bottom of 1209, the Ein Oid is a completely new dimension. What is that? He says that will be Malchus Atzmatei. Malchus will be not even be receiving from Tiferes of Ima, of Bina, just looking at the actual words, but the darkness itself, the Helam itself, will reveal the Helam Atzmi that goes all the way to the source that we learned about, that's higher than Giluim altogether, higher than Oir altogether. And that will be Mashpia in Zah. And he says that's his Chatzus Dover, Shaloi Hoya B'Klos, Shtasus Gam Lifnei HaTzimtzum, V'Yeshleimer. I'm reading at the bottom of 1209, the Lechein Ein Acheshev Be'etz Chayin, Be'etz Chaim Adrega Zu B'Aliyah Samalchus. That's why it does not count this level in Eitz Chaim. Because that's a completely new dimension. That's beyond the Oid altogether. And he says that's the level of Ein Oid. That Elokim itself will be revealing the divine Helema Atzmi. The Yesh itself. Okay. But now we still have one issue. What were things like before the diminishment of the moon? From the Eitz Chaim, you can't really know. So the Rebbe Rashab addresses that both on page 1209 and where we are now, 1355, right? That's where we are?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So he says like this.
Oh, this is in Ishtalshelus?
Excuse
Even
me?
the dage from the last dage that he said, from Helem Atzmi, that's Ishtalshelus?
That's what it sounds like, is the end of the Asad Love. That will be when Mashiach comes. And that is, he calls that's still, no. It's higher than the Shtalshus as we know it right now, but it's still, he calls it not Ischatzus Gmura B'Klos Shtalshus. It's still ultimately, Tiferes of Ima is Shtalshus. It's Bina. Except the moon is now receiving directly. But here's the question now. What about the beginning of creation? So the Rebbe Rashab addresses this. At the top of page 1209, he says like this. That when we say there's a Kesed Echad L'Shnehem, he's now going to explain, we say there's one crown to two kings. That's the way it was by the beginning of creation. That's what he explains, because that's why Shnei Me'eres Hagdelim, there were two great luminaries, and they both received from one Kesed. That's why the moon came with a complaint. How could two kings have
We just lost you again.
Can you
No,
hear
we
me?
can hear you. Yes,
Okay.
now we can hear you.
So he says
Yes.
they both receive from Kesed. But the expression is, so then and yet we said that even by creation before the diminishment, it's still called Mashpia Makabel. So the explanation is because it's Derech Maiver Hazah. Even when the moon is receiving straight from the same Keser that Zah is receiving, it still travels, passes through Zah. Not his slapshus, but passes through. And he says, "V'yadur de b'amshacha shebederech ma'ivir eina er mishtana klal." Now, when the air goes ma'ivir, like I explained yesterday, a funnel, the air doesn't change fundamentally. His slapshus actually changes and shifts, and in some way alters the transmission, but ma'ivir doesn't. But now comes the question: so which one? So it was already the beginning of creation that way. So why does the Eitz Chaim says Lo Hoya Ma'elam? So he asked that question. I'm going to read it on the top of page 1209. He says, Eitz Chaim Shamir Teirech Perek Beis Kosev the Madrega Hazayin Sheyir Keser Ech L'Shleim Lo Hoya Ma'elam. He says that one Keser for both never existed before. Now we just established Umash Misham Shagam Kedem Amiyat Lo Hoya Kein. From the Eitz Chaim, it appears that even before the diminishment of the moon, it wasn't that way. And we just said before the diminishment, they were both receiving from one Keser. He explained that on the bottom of page 1208 from the Rabbeinu Bachai. So the Rebbe Rashab answers with a Negeres HaKedesh. Negeres HaKedesh, the Alter Rebbe says that even Derech Maiver is not completely, you can't say it doesn't have any effect. It doesn't have the same effect as Islapsus, but to say there's no effect, you cannot say. Yeshlema pi mashakos begeres hakedesh bekunter sachen dibra masel hav mashkot b'shtaim shegam ma'ivir hu b'chinas islapshus shepoil al kaponim zeh sheyuchel islapshus b'madrega tachten. That even passing through ma'ivir also has an element of islapshus, at least that it's allowing it to transmit to the next level. V'zeu shekoser beitz chayim de madrega shetekabel ma'bina shaloy de ma'ivir zaloy hoyim ma'elam. So what the Eitz Chaim is talking about is that the seventh level of Aliyah, also that was never existent, that it's not even B'derech Ma'ivir. It's literally Teferes Sima is here, one track to the sun and one to the moon. Whereas in the beginning of creation, before the diminishment, it was both are receiving from one crown, but it's going through Shemesh, passing through, and it has some effect, and then to the moon. But the moon is receiving straight from Teferes Sima, but it's passing through the sun. The lower levels, it's not receiving from Keser of Teferes Sima because it's been affected by Zah, Bislapshus, and so on, the lower levels. So there you have the beginning of creation, it goes through Zah, B'derech Ma'ivir. La'asad Lavi in the seventh level, it's not B'derech Ma'ivir.
We can't hear you. We can see you, but we can't hear you. It's really weird. It's like you muted yourself.
Can you hear me?
No, I heard the whole thing. I
didn't hear. I didn't hear.
I could see also.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
You just repeat the last sentence.
But there is a level that is even higher than that. It's not from...
Since there's other people in the class, let me just make sure I got the picture clear, and then I'll take questions. 1 minute. So bottom line is, there is essentially 7 levels. The 7th level, Lo Hoya Ma'elam, never happened before, even the beginning of creation, before the diminishment, because there, Malchus is receiving straight from Bina, from Teferes Sima, from its Keser, just like the sun is. Before the diminishment, Malchus also was receiving from Teferes Sima, but through Ma'ivir. That's the key point to remember. And the next level that let's not even call it 8, the level that where Malchus itself is receiving from Helam Ha'atzmi is a completely different story and not relevant to our conversation and discussion right now. That's a summation of the picture before we learn it inside. Go ahead. You want to ask questions? Go ahead.
I asked questions to everybody before. When we talk about Upham, the lowest levels, is that going, as it goes up, is it going up to Seder Stalshus from from up to to Netzach, from down to up. Are those levels that have a name?
I'm not clear what the question is. That's called Aliyah. It goes from the bottom up, elevates.
Like it goes from Yisod and then Hod and then.
I mean, that's in Eitz Chaim. He talks about the different levels of which spheres. Yeah, that's generally how it works. As it climbs, it goes to higher spheres and higher levels of revelation.
That's exactly what I want. Thank you.
Yeah.
What did the moon want before when she said Ein Shnei Melachim? She wanted to get without Derech Ma'avir?
Most likely, yeah. Because it was already getting B'derech Ma'avir from Zoh. There was a Kesed Echad, but he wanted to have it exclusive. There's entire Maimorim that talk about it. He doesn't talk about what the taina of the moon was here. He talks about it in Isaac Homler in Shnei Me'eris HaGedolim talks about it. There's a Maimorim, Machar Chodesh, from the Alter Rebbe, Tovkuf Samach Zayin, Eirat Teira. They talk, what was the moon's complaint exactly? What did it want? What did it not want to be a Makabel? Did it want to be a Mashpia? There's a lot of ways to explain it. It's not relevant to our conversation here at all, but there's a lot of ways. You could say that the moon wanted to be the Mashpia. Why should the sun be the Mashpia? You could argue that. You could argue that the moon didn't want to have that. Anyway, there's a lot of ways to explain, but he doesn't go into it here, so it's not really so negated.
Okay. What kind of answer is this? She was already.
Look, we're learning Ayin Beis now. Since he doesn't explain that here, I would go to those Maimorim I just referred to if you really want to know what it is. Because this is not a different sugya.
What was the mimer you said, brother? The Frierdiker Rebbe?
This is complex enough. Let's just address the actual status. What the moon wanted and what happened can be explained. If you really want to dig deeper, if you understand this well, you'll understand the whole story of the moon's diminishment and then the moon's Aliyah, because it's all part of the Shtalshlus of Mashpia Makabel. So maybe I'll address it later. I first want to get clarity what we're learning inside here. That's why I wanted to go through the 7 levels. And now also.
And also to remind you about the Oira Chamo Shivasayim.
That's also, as I said, it's a fine question, but it's not the discussion in this mimer here. The Alter Rebbe, Rebbe Rashab doesn't bring it here. If you want to go look in Erech Eir Halavon and Sefer Erechim, he'll give you, I think, 5 or 6 explanations in that pasuk. There's all kinds of explanations what that means. It's not a contradiction. The fact that the sun will become bigger than it is today, it doesn't mean necessarily bigger than the moon. Remember, could be Shivasayim compared to the sun today. Because remember, Ein Oid, the Helam Ha'atzmi, the sun does not reveal. It's only the Levana. In Sefer Erechim, he talks about different interpretations. Again, I'm trying to focus right now, Pshat in this mimer. That's the way I like to learn. What can I tell you? And then once we understand what we're learning here, we want to talk about the broader topics. I've given some sources, and I'll be happy to talk about it. To me, right now, it'll just confuse matters because let's just discuss the actual pshat in this mimer. That's just, to me, the easiest way to learn this.
Why is the highest revelation, if you will, that the coming from Tiferes of Ima, why isn't it like from Keser? Why is it from a lower level than Keser? If it's coming ultimately the highest level, why is the highest level not exactly the highest level?
I'm not sure. What is the highest level in your mind?
I thought Keser, Ratzon Hashem is
why Keser? Why not Atzmus? Why not before the Tzimtzum? I mean, everything is microcosm, macrocosm. It's all high levels. Compared, the sun and the moon, Zah and Malchus are midas. They're born from Chachma and Bina, father and mother. In a normal process, as we learned with Mudva, Murgish, Muskel, as you climb, if you actually did this in Avodah, you'd never ask that question. You're asking a mathematical question. In Avodah, the first step is that the midas on the lower level should grow. As I said, you're talking about Malchus that's been diminished to the point of almost oblivion, almost disappears. It's being rebuilt through Avodah. As it grows first it receives from lower levels of Zah, then higher levels of Zah. Zah in turn is channeling into Malchus, into the moon, the levels of Chachma and Bina, namely Tiferes Ima, which is called Keser. The Keser of Zah is Tiferes Ima. The Keser of the higher level, the higher level is always the Keser of the lower level. So the Keser of Zah is the Tiferes of Bina. So that's where we're discussing. If you want to speak in broader macrocosmic terms, you could speak it also in broader terms, but that's the relationship. Remember that we talked about the Shiluach HaKan, where the Eim Revetzes Ala Frechim, the mother, Ima, first protects and hovers over her chicks. And as they grow and develop, the Midas, then they could receive more from the mother to the point that they actually send away the mother and everything. They propel the mother to go higher, all the way to Arich and Atik.
But you just made my argument for me.
It's not an argument. There's no argument here. It's very clear.
But it's higher than Tiferes Ima.
We're talking about the Aliyah of Malchus right now. The Aliyah of Malchus, there's 7 levels. The highest level of Malchus is L'Asad Lave, when Malchus will be receiving straight from Tiferes Ima, without having to go through Zah.
I thought
then there's another level. We talked about the Helam Atzmi. That Malchus, the Malavana, goes to the Helam Atzmi. That's another level that's completely outside of this framework.
I thought we talked about the maturation of I guess it was, well, certainly the maturation of the yesh, but it was the Inyan of once the Shiluach HaKan, once the. But
that's another stage. That's not the 7 Aliyahs of Malchus. That's another stage when everything elevates even higher. That's not everything has to fit into the 7 stages of Malchus.
But
we're talking about Malchus from its lowest stage going up to coming face to face with Zah is a tremendous high level. And then it comes even more that it's receiving straight from Tiferes Ima, which is what is relevant here. I mean, this is all of Chassidus talks microcosm, macrocosm. That's exactly when you were talking about these levels in Aved, you're talking about tremendously high levels of a person from Malchus being able to receive straight from Tiferes of Ima is considered L'Asad Lave. That's what Mashiach, when Mashiach will come, that's what will happen.
I get it. And that's precisely why I'm asking why it's not coming like from Chachma.
Well, Chachma and Bina connect with each other. The mother is always the one that associates most with the Midas. Since we're talking about the Aliyah of Malchus and the Midas, so we're talking about the relationship with the mother. We will talk about Chachma as well, as we have discussed it, but this is, what can I tell you? I mean, this is asking questions like, this is a whole Seder, everything, you could always ask everything about anything with that. If you say that something elevates from Yetzirah to Bria, you could always ask, and what about its elevation to Atzilus? So fine, it's all in stages. Here we're talking about this structure.
Can you give the name of the mimer that talks about this more, or the Friedrich Rebbe Al Kain Yomru? What was it?
HaMoishlim.
And what was the year?
Tafresh Tzadik Aleph.
Thank you.
Tafresh Tzadik what?
Tzadik Aleph. Tafresh Tzadik Aleph.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll stop here. I didn't learn inside anything. We'll learn tomorrow. And just an overview of the whole topic of Malchus and Aliyahs. But now when we read inside, I think it'll be a lot clearer once I gave this whole context. Okay?
I have another question.